I use a lot of these palpation techniques next to, of course, the pulse and abdominal diagnose, because that's something I really learned from the Japanese, which is very useful. We feel the channels. Actually, there are different ways to feel the channels. Um, but I feel also more directly the chi, so we call it the shape of the chi, so that you can directly feel in the body what the chi dynamic is doing. And in a similar way, you can feel what the fluids are doing.
Hmm.
And so the fluids in a more general sense, so it's the yin and the yang, but also actually all aspects of fluidity in the body, so including the blood. So you can feel that. Then there are different aspects of chi you can feel. And also what is something which, and this is something we put a lot of emphasis in engaging vitality in what we teach, is that very often the restrictions in the system, if you're able to dissolve them, and even some restrictions might not be the main restriction or the main thing in the body, but even though if you target that and you open up that restriction, you initiate a self-healing process. And as you know, everything is related to each other. There's
Right.
somehow you have to start. So
Felix, it's great to see you. Thanks for
great to
coming
see
on.
you.
I feel a connection with you because we have similar eclectic backgrounds. Our interests are both
Yes.
extremely wide and they align in so many ways. And you have said something that resonates with me as well. And you said that sometimes we can't find, or sorry, you say sometimes we don't find Chinese medicine, it finds us. What did you mean by that?
Yeah, actually, it's a quote of one of my. Actually, it was not even a teacher I studied a lot with, but he's a guy I know a long time, Dr. Lee in Holland, and he always said that, and I like that phrase. He said always to his students, and partly these are also my students. He said, "Well, Chinese medicine, it's you don't find Chinese medicine, but Chinese medicine finds you," and it's interesting because of course, everybody has a different history, but some of my colleagues and friends had this more or less similar experience that somehow you are attracted to East Asian medicine and you end up there, and it's not something really a conscious choice at that moment in time.
Yeah,
So my story, if you like to hear the
I love
details,
to hear it.
I was a kind of dropout in the sense that I after high school, secondary school, Lyceum, I didn't know what to do. So, and I had a big interest in East Asian philosophy and religion. We will come to that later on. And so ultimately I ended up with a Tibetan teacher. I will talk a little bit more about it. And he said, "Well, what do you want to do in life?" And I said, "Well, I'm not sure. I maybe sit on a mountain and become enlightened." And then he nodded and he said, "Well, no, that's not the way. You're here in this society, and you have to make yourself purposeful for the society." So I thought, okay, my dad and my mom told me too, of course, but this was a Tibetan Lama, and I thought, well, maybe I should pay heed to that. So then actually, it's a long story. I made a retreat. I was in Switzerland for 1 year and studying very intensively Buddhism. Then I came back and I thought I have to do something, but I didn't know what. And then I had a friend who studied Indology in Leiden at Leiden University, and I thought, well, should I study Indology, Tibetan language, Sanskrit? But how many professors do you need for that in Holland? So I thought maybe I should do something else. And I just by chance I just went to a presentation that was also here in The Hague, where they offered different educations, or they gave you information about different education, especially on the field of language, because I have something with languages, and I thought maybe I can become a translator later on, whatever.
Mm.
And then I came back, and I will remember that from the rest of my life, because I went through the hallway, and then on the hallway there was a poster, A5 poster, and that was the Academy for Acupuncture, Ars Medica, which was then one of the first schools in Holland teaching Chinese medicine. And I saw that modern and classical acupuncture, and I thought, oh, that's what I want to do. But of course, I had no medical background at that time. I knew something. I knew something about the Chinese philosophy already. So I had an intake, an interview, and ultimately they took me in. And of course, I had also to follow a medical education, Western medical education, some pre medication. But ultimately, that was the way it went. And then later on, I realized, so something, you're drawn to it because I could have chosen anything else. But Chinese medicine picked me somehow.
That's interesting. It's like we're just walking around one day and then all of a sudden it clicks. We need to do something. It grabs you at the right time.
It grabs you at
The
the right
sign
time.
revealed itself to you at the moment. You spent decades traveling around and studying and working all different traditions and cultures. And I
Mhm.
wonder what were some of the environments or periods that profoundly shaped your practice today?
Well, that's a good question. And I think there's much to say to that because there are different moments in life. I think it started out in the library of my dad.
Hmm.
So my father was a very interesting figure. He was born in the Dutch Indies, so the what we call now Indonesia. And my granddad was a kind of medical missionary there. So he grew up in Indonesia and he was very much interested in East Asian philosophy. But he was interested in anything. So we had really Spinoza, from all the big Western philosophers to Lao Tse and the Buddha, everything was there in on the bookshelves, from the old Greek philosophers to the big Asian philosophers, and also history. And he had many different interests in arts. So as a kid, I was always looking in these books, the beautiful paintings, Chinese landscape paintings, Japanese paintings, of course. And I somehow was completely fascinated by the I Ching. My father said, well, I'm going to study that when I am retired. So these were the things which really triggered something into me. And I think that set me on the journey. So that's the first environment, I think. And then secondly, I think well, it's difficult to say because you have always these different phases in life. So I did this study in Chinese medicine, as I just mentioned. And I was very young actually. At that time, most of the people who were studying, they were already medical professionals
Hmm.
and they had a second career. So they decided they were physiotherapists or they were physicians and they decided to do Chinese acupuncture or Chinese medicine. And so at some point, I think, so for me, I was really exploring and I was traveling also. So I think I traveled a lot in the Middle East at that time also. So I think, especially Turkey. So I think that also influenced me. And maybe we come back to that later on. That because I think that was one of your other questions. Is it helped me actually to improvise also because I
Yeah.
was there in Turkey and I had to give people herbs. But of course, you couldn't get Chinese herbs there. So I had to figure out, okay, how I look to the local herbs and the energetics and try to do things there. So that was also for me inspiring. I had a great teacher. Maybe because you asked also about the teacher, that François Ramakers was my first important teacher, I would say. I had from the beginning on, I had the luck to have good teachers, but François was a very good teacher in many aspects. He passed away already quite some time ago, and he was from origin a biochemist,
Hmm.
and he was a theologian. He was really also a very incredible figure. But he and he was cured from pancreas cancer by a Tibetan monk who was specialized in Chinese and Tibetan medicine.
Hmm.
And so he was a biochemist from origin. So he thought, well, this is really cool. I have to study that. So he became, especially in the 80s in Europe, one of the main teachers for Chinese herbal medicine. So that was also an environment which influenced me quite a lot.
Can you repeat
So
his name for me again?
François Ramakers.
Hmm. Okay.
And in the older generations, people who study Chinese medicine in Europe, they know him because and he also introduced all these like Bob Flaws and all the big names, He had also, yeah, he founded a very nice school in The Hague, which didn't last very long, but it was a very nice school actually. And so he definitely informed me. And then of course you have these all these different shifts. So later on, I was introduced to Stephen Birch, who
Mhm.
was teaching Japanese acupuncture, and that also had big impact on me. And of course, also being in contact with Japanese teachers, because Stephen introduced me also to all the Japanese teachers. They brought them either to Europe or we went to Japan and studied with them. And I think, and that is also somewhere your question, where is this shift, how you start to think different about your medicine.
Yeah,
I
we'll
think
get there.
that was an important shift because I realized all the Japanese are doing stuff very different than we learn in TCM.
Yeah,
And I realized that I knew already because I read, but I realized, oh, this is a real different approach. And to some degree, I am always very careful, because there are all these people they talk about classical Chinese medicine versus TCM, and TCM has definitely its benefits. So I'm not against TCM, but also it has, of course, its problems because it's a system which was developed in the last century, with its limitations.
right.
And and also I think it was much more devised on herbal medicine. So the whole Zhang Fu model, which is the core of the
Right.
TCM, is really designed for herbal medicine
Yeah,
and not so much for acupuncture because you work with the Jinglo.
right.
So for me, that was a big
So if we
shift.
can interject briefly, because not all
Yes.
of our listeners are are educated in the language. So the Zhangfu are the organ systems, the solid and hollow, and the Jinglo are the channels for
Yeah.
acupuncture. And when TCM was created, it was basically they took the herbal medicine method of diagnosis and treatment and applied acupuncture on top, where before they used to be different, separate, steep practices. So that's what you're referring to as traditional Chinese medicine versus TCM. Did I miss anything in that?
Yeah, well, I think in a way you could say that, well, it's Chinese medicine had this, but again, I don't want to go too much into the history, but
Right.
it's interesting because when Chinese medicine developed firstly in the Han Dynasty, so that's around 2000 years ago, or even before, but that's the period we have the first books like the Neijing. It was much more focused on acupuncture.
Yeah.
And acupuncture was also for the elite. So the elite people were doing acupuncture, and herbal medicine was seen as a kind of folk medicine.
Hmm.
And of course, you have important herbal texts already from that time, like the Shanghan Lun. But actually, the Shanghan Lun started to become really important only 1000 years later. That's very interesting.
Yeah.
And at some point in time, there is a shift. So herbal medicine became much more important in China. And then the elite doctors, they discarded acupuncture more as a folk medicine. And the real literati medicicians, the learned doctors, they had long nails and they wouldn't touch a patient almost, and they just felt the pulse and they gave them herbs. So a very different medicine developed, which also had a great value because I like a lot of these great doctors. But and I do both, so I do acupuncture and herbal medicine. And but that at that time I think, and especially in the later imperial time, so when we talk about the 18th century, 19th century, acupuncture was definitely in decline in China.
Mm.
That also explains maybe why some aspects were really lost in a way in China. I won't say completely lost because some people always continue to practice, but I think for the larger public it was really the herbal medicine which was the main thing. And then after the revolution, actually, because a lot of people say, oh, the communists destroyed Chinese medicine, and that's not true. The communists did many bad things in China, and also maybe with regards to Chinese medicine, but it's not like that. And I think TCM was a kind of genuine attempt because Chinese medicine is huge. There are
Yeah.
all these many different schools and different ideas, and so they try to make a kind of one system out of that, which is of course very problematic, but they tried. And in a way, I think maybe they saved Chinese medicine also, because if they didn't, we have seen this in other countries. Actually, Chinese medicine is only one of the few traditional medicines which stand still alive, which is still alive, is
Yeah.
practiced. A lot of the traditional medicines, like Unani is a good, you know something about the Greek Arabic medicine, which is also very valuable. And well, it's still practiced to some extent in Pakistan and India, but in the rest of the Middle East, it disappeared. If you go to Iran or to Turkey, there is some vague knowledge there, but it's gone.
Yeah. You
And
know,
so, the,
Felix,
yeah,
I'd like to ask you this because we're on the topic of modern and we're talking about TCM. It's modern, but it's not, and it's not as maybe thorough as acupuncture by itself before. But you had mentioned earlier about Japanese acupuncture, which is modern, but having some good things in it. And I know Korean acupuncture is also different. What
correct.
makes the modern approach of Japanese acupuncture uh, better, and I'm putting air quotes around the word better, than the TCM approach because both are kind of modern, iterations.
Yeah. That's a very good question. I think first of all, yeah, we have to be very careful with the better. And there's always this nationalistic debate, the
Of
Chinese will
course.
say, okay, and the Japanese will say this. First of all, Japanese acupuncture is also not one thing. There are many different styles in Japan. There are even quite a lot of people who do TCM in Japan.
Mm,
So again, there are many different styles. The styles I came across are mainly what we call meridian therapy, and especially one aspect in the meridian, or one school in the meridian therapy, what we call Toyohari, which was developed by blind practitioners, and Manaka also. Manaka was a very very interesting physician. He was actually a surgeon, and he discovered a lot of things. But maybe it's too much detail to talk about that here. But
yeah.
to say, I think one of the things which appeared me in Japanese acupuncture, that there is a lot of focus on palpation.
Mm,
And partly, I think, especially in the Toyohari tradition, but also in other traditions, like in Manaka also, there is a lot of feeling. And and that's interesting because if you go really back in time in Chinese medicine, palpation was also very important. And probably Elizabeth Su, she's a great
yeah.
scholar in the history of Chinese medicine, and she wrote a very nice book, The Telling Touch. And there she actually, it's about even the oldest works we have about Chinese medicine before the Neijing.
Mm,
And these are the oldest case histories we have. And from that, she concluded actually that palpation was at that time very important. And they didn't only, they talk about the Mai, but when they talk about the Mai, so we interpret it often as pulses, because the one interpretation is Mai is pulse, but actually they look much worse. They felt the channels, they probably felt all the extremities. There is definitely also the base of Hara diagnosis, so the abdominal palpation, what they
mhm.
do a lot in Japan, goes back to the Nanjing. So that's all coming from China. But I think, as far as I know, what I've read from research, that somehow due to cultural development, moral issues, at some point it was not proper to touch the body, or not to. The pulse always remained. So in Chinese always they kept feeling the pulse, but other palpation disappeared more or less in China. And the
Yeah.
Japanese, they picked that up. So they developed that very much. So that, if you would ask me what really is a difference in the Japanese approach, would be that there is a lot of more attention to palpation.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But then again, there are now he passed away, but there's a famous doctor in China, Wang Yuyi, who and actually Jason Robertson in the United States is teaching his approach, and they really come back to that actually, and they do a lot of palpation. So there's also kind of revival in China for more, and also Wang Yuyi is saying, well, we have to go back to a more balanced view. So as we said, this whole Zhangfu versus the Jinglo, so the organs versus the channels. Maybe we have to put more attention again back on the channels in acupuncture. So I think in China also things are changing,
Yeah.
depending, of course,
Yeah.
who you talk to. Yeah,
It's very interesting. Now, if I'm recalling, you also spent a significant amount of time immersed in Buddhist and Taoist practice environments.
correct.
right?
Yes.
Can you tell us a little bit about these deeper contemplative periods in your life? Were you in a monastery, in a cave, Mount Mount Huashan? Uh, we'd love to know.
Well, actually, I spent one time, 1 month in a cave, but that was really in very early. That was in my dropout time in a way. I went to Crete with my girlfriend and another friend, and we thought, well, it could be cool to hang out in a cave, and we did. And I was reading Chinese philosophy and Buddhist stuff already. As far because I was very young, I was even around 20 or something like that. So I
Wow.
was really you so you're not really your mind is not really ripened to understand all that stuff. But so I was in a cave. But then I had 1 year, as I mentioned before, actually I entered Chinese medicine. I met this Tibetan Lama in 82. So at that time I was actually 20 years when I met Lama Sherab. And so my time in the cave was a little bit before. Uh, but that was all more or less in that period.
Yeah.
And I'm still very indebted to him because I think there are these gatekeepers or people who open the doors for you. And definitely that opened my path in Buddhism, especially Tibetan Buddhism. And I had earlier encounters because as a kid, actually, maybe it is worth to mention, I had a lot of headaches as a kid. So
Me
my
too.
mother put me on yoga, and which was very revolutionary at that time because it was early 70s and yoga was just new in Holland. There were my teacher that was also, these people also are influential ultimately in my life. She was a Catholic nun, but she was completely not what you would think about a Catholic
Yeah.
nun. She had a Hindu guru as well. And she was very
I
open-minded,
love it.
and she was a very good yoga teacher.
Great.
Still, some people of the older generation they talk about her because she was a good yoga teacher. She was with another guy. They were the first to teach yoga in Holland, and she introduced me to another lady, Nora Houtman, who was a Zen teacher. So at my 12th, I started to do Zen meditation.
You
But you
had
can
so much,
imagine,
you had so much cool stuff around you, all of these
cool
disciplines
stuff.
in Holland. Like I wouldn't have thought
Oh
it.
yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
the country is so small compared to like United States where I am, where you have so many people coming that you had those great opportunities. I just wanted a quick side jump to your headaches and the yoga. Did yoga help, and was it from the asanas or from the pranayama, from breathing?
We did both, but I think mainly asanas. But it definitely helped me. So
Hmm.
I remained sensitive for headaches, but it definitely helped me. And it helped me
Great.
also. I think ultimately it changes something at a deeper level in you. So,
Yeah.
and that happened to me. Maybe if I look back now, I think it definitely made a difference in the way you engage with the world. And
Hmm.
so definitely that was a good thing. And Holland actually is an interesting country. It's very small, but of course it's an open country. And of course it was one of the countries where, especially the 60s and 70s, it was very opened up and people started to travel. We had a lot of people who came from America and England who all traveled all the way to India. We had the magic bus going from Amsterdam to India all the way.
Wow.
So I had all these interactions. So I think. Actually, I think at that time Holland was a very interesting place. We had these places like the Cosmos. These were the centers. And these were where the hippies were, and people were smoking dope. But at the same time, Buddhist teachers would teach there, and there were all kind of events going on. So it was a very interesting time. But coming back to my spiritual episode. So I did after I met this Tibetan teacher who opened more or less the door into Tibetan Buddhism later on. I did a retreat of 1 year in the mountains in Switzerland,
Mm,
and I think that put somewhere the base.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Wow. Did that time of contemplation or even after that, I mean, that established your base, like you say, and you've got Buddhism and Zen and yoga. Uh, did this did this meditative contemplative period help your clinical practice, the way you address or think about or palpate with patients, a patient?
I think that would come much later because at that time I was still not a practitioner. It
Right. No,
it
I mean,
wasn't.
but today, do you, looking
Yeah,
back at that time,
yeah, I think at some point you could say, I think in general, I think that some spiritual practice, whatever you do, and
yeah,
some meditational practice is definitely helping you in your clinic. And nowadays, I'm always careful to say these things, but I would say that as a general rule, you could say that some kind of meditation is really helpful. So I actually advise
absolutely.
my students to do that. And whatever they do, that's not so important. Of course,
Right.
some things are maybe more helpful than other things, but I think some spiritual, at least, and again, spiritual quote unquote, because I'm a little bit careful with these terms, but some kind of meditation is really beneficial.
I believe so. Yeah. Yeah. You've traveled a lot teaching Europe, Middle East, Asia, and other places. Do you find that there's something that you've learned from your time teaching and the interaction with students that you didn't learn from the books or from the classroom?
I think we learn so much from students.
Yeah.
So I think the interaction, first of all, teaching really helps you to understand something very well because you only can teach something if you really understand it.
Yeah.
And even recently, I was teaching in Indonesia, in Jakarta, which was a very nice experience. I had a very nice group and very open and eager students. And I think you always get somewhere better, in teaching, and you get in a flow. And also the questions students ask are very important because they help you to think about things. So I think, uh, of course, learning things from books are important, learning things from teachers are important, but I would say teaching yourself to students is at least as important. You can learn
Yeah.
a lot from your students.
I probably learned the most depth about things by teaching because
Yeah,
you come to hear yourself saying things and explaining things that you didn't realize you knew.
yeah,
You knew it tacitly, but not explicitly. And then when
yeah,
the questions come out of the blue, you're like, why would you ask that? And then you explain it. You're like, oh yeah, that's a good question.
yeah, exactly,
Oh man.
exactly. Yeah, yeah, you learned a lot too, huh? Like that. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah. And
yeah.
and over time, I mean, you've had a lot of teachers in a lot of countries. I assume like most people, okay, I'll just say assume like myself, we go through periods of accumulation. We get so passionate and we just want to learn and learn and learn and buy books and take seminars and go on retreats and meet new teachers and find a secret master and learn more and learn more. And at some point, you start dropping it all away. Yeah. Tell me about your transformation that way and some things that happened with you.
Yeah, that's very good you mentioned that because that's also I think that's a phase you go through. So I can, although I know people who really were shopping all over the world, and I never was into that because I realized, first of all, I had the luck that I had really good teachers. So I was realizing, okay, these people, it's important to hang around these people.
Hmm.
And like with the Tibetan Buddhism, I can give you an example. So I happily met very good teacher Lama Shirab, and my other important teacher is Sakya Tritsin, His Holiness Sakya Tritsin, who is the former head of the Sakya order, so one of the main, and somebody who was trained in Tibet, before the Chinese invasion. And I know people who really they flew all over the world to get all kinds of initiations, and oh yeah, I have to need to meet this teacher and that teacher, and I did a little bit shopping, but also I realized early on in life that you can get really lost in doing that. So I never was buying books is a different thing. I bought a lot of books.
I know you're like me, just love books.
So that's crazy. And I still I also become more, I slow down because
Yeah.
you at some point you realize I can't read everything in my life. I have now already so many books, I probably can't read them all in my life. So you get more modest. I think so, and there are these different curves. So as I said, I was introduced at some point to Japanese acupuncture that really got my interest, and I really delved very deeply in that. I studied that for more than 25 years, and the last 15 years I study and teach this engaging vitality. Maybe we'll come to that a little bit more in detail. So of course you change, and some things, of course, you. So for example, however, I love Japanese acupuncture. One of the downsides is that although they are really great in palpation, and they're really, some of the teachers I studied with, they're really excellent, but it's still protocol based.
Mm,
And at some point I realized that protocols, I think in the beginning they're very useful, but at some point you need to drop them
yeah.
because then they become a barrier. So, and at that point, when you realize that, for example, I went last year to Japan again because I thought it was good to calibrate with my teachers. And I might do that in the future again because it's really nice. But I also realized that I don't need to spend my whole life in studying with them because I have other things to do too. So you at some point you change your focus in that sense.
Yeah, that's important. I think you mentioned the protocol. I think the protocol is like the base foundation. Like everybody needs to be working from the same foundation so that there's a level of knowledge and I don't know, a template to work from, but after that, it's an art, right? It's not just the
Right.
connect the dots. And the problem I see with, or have seen over the years with acupuncture in the West is it's protocol. You have migraine headache, these are the 10 points. You have constipation, these are the points. And it's like, there can be many, many causes for every pain, illness, or disease. It's not the same cause, so the point prescription should be different. So sticking to the protocols becomes a barrier to progress later, but it's needed in the beginning.
Yeah, in the beginning, you need, of course, you first you need to know the
You don't
channels, you
have
need to know the
experience yet.
point, you have to experience. No, so it's perfectly fine to have something at the back of your sleeve also. But I think the further you progress, the more you realize that you really have to listen to the story the body tells you.
Hmm.
So when I treat patients now, I really feel what's going on. What is the chi telling me? What are all the parameters telling me? And then, of course, I need to find the point of entry. I sometimes compare it with a game of chess or Go. You have to first move, so
Right.
that's important. But that's also not fixed. You have to find out what is at that moment in time the best thing to start, and then very often it will unravel itself. So the system, there's a kind of communication with the system, and the system of the patient will tell you what to do next. And of course, you need the tools to know how to listen to the body, and so you need to acquire the skills, and also for that, maybe in the beginning, you need a kind of protocol. We teach also our students, oh, you have to do like this or that, and then, but at some point, then the story will make the line, and you just follow. I always say I follow the chi.
Hmm. Hmm. So you're selecting your point of entry, your first needle points, and then the follow-up by a sense of communication by your
Correct.
palpation of the chi, of the pulses where you're feeling the chi. Uh,
Yeah, the pulses are one thing. I feel many things. So
mm,
I use many palpatory techniques. So actually, one of the approaches to acupuncture also I teach, which has been developed by Dan Bensky and Charles Chase, both pioneers in Chinese medicine.
sure.
Especially Dan Bensky was one of the
Bensky,
first
sure.
who
Hmm.
was studying Chinese medicine in Macau and Taiwan, Hong Kong before even China was opened up. And the interesting thing, Chip, and we call him Chip because Charles Chase is his full name, but we call him always Chip. He passed away sadly enough, but then he's
Mm,
still alive. He's still around and active. But Dan and Chip were both very good acupuncturists and herbalists, but also osteopaths. And
hmm
they figured out at some point in time that there are overlaps between osteopathy and East Asian medicine. And they figured out some of the palpation techniques used in osteopathy could be translated to Chinese medicine or East Asian medicine. So I use a lot of these palpation techniques next to, of course, the pulse and abdominal diagnosis because that's something I really learned from the Japanese, is very useful. We feel the channels. Actually, there are different ways to feel the channels. Um, but I feel also more directly the chi, so we call it the shape of the chi, so that you can directly feel in the body what the chi dynamic is doing. And in a similar way, you can feel what the fluids are doing.
hmm
And so the fluids in a more general sense, so it's the yin and the yang, but also actually all aspects of fluidity in the body, so including the blood. So you can feel that. Then there are different aspects of chi you can feel. And also, what is something which, and this is something we put a lot of emphasis in engaging vitality in what we teach, is that very often restrictions in the system, if you're able to dissolve them, and even some restrictions might not be the main restriction or the main thing in the body, but even though if you target that and you open up that restriction, you initiate a self-healing process. And as you know, everything is related to each other. There's
Right.
somehow you have to start. So again, with how to start your treatment, often to find somewhere where there is a restriction in the system, which tells you today, oh, please pay attention to this. This is important now, and you're able to open that, and then the body also starts to give you more information. And I see a lot of complex patients, with a lot of issues going on. And I think sometimes if you just use your theory, it can be very confusing because what's really going on in these patients?
Right.
And actually, by chance, for example, I had yesterday a very complicated case, a new lady coming in with many multiple problems, and I told her also, it takes for me time. Probably, I don't, after one treatment, I don't know exactly what's going on in your system. I need to probably to treat you a couple of times to get a clear picture what's really going on. So that's it's always difficult to tell in
Is that what
a
you refer to as perceptive touch, or is that something different?
yeah, how would you define perceptive touch opposite? Yeah, you mentioned that, huh? So how would you define that perceptive touch?
I I would do it like an innate knowing, right? So you know we have the regular you look at the eyes, the tongue, the shape, the skin, the hair, the tone. You take the pulses, et cetera, et cetera, and then you if you're sitting there and you're holding the moment and holding space in a very quiet place for yourself, even if you're next to the patient you can kind of get a sense or a perception of something maybe deeper, or all of those pieces of information come together for you to form a pattern of some kind, or a solution,
Yeah, I
rather than
understand what
just
you mean.
grabbing Xiaoyang pattern out of your back pocket, you know.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, in a way, I think the way we teach it, of course, is that actually all these things you feel, like the pulse, it can be floating or sinking, it can be tight or wiry, etc. So, for example, when I feel the chi directly, also you have these kind of qualities, pretty similar. So you can feel whether the chi is agitated or calm. Is it segregated or is it more coherent? Is it blocked or is it open? Is there fluidity or not? So and all the things actually we have our definitions for that because you have to figure out what's going on. So in that sense, I think there is still some perception because you perceive. What is very important is, I think, when you do whatever you do, when you touch patients, in general, I think when you inquire the patients, is to be very attentive. So I always say I have no, first of all, I don't have any I don't try to project my ideas. So also one of the things I do initially when I see a patient first, I want to feel, and then I want to know the story. So
Mm,
I do a extended anamnesis as well. I do all the questioning, but I do that after the touching.
mm,
Because when you start and you have already, and you know the complaints of the patient, of course, sometimes people call you and they tell already right away what they have. But then it's good to have a bad memory, like I forget it.
mm.
And then I feel, because
Right.
it's very easy to be biased. So to be
It is.
unbiased, to be open, and to be perceptive, and to be, yeah, I think you are just like a kind of, there's nice thing in the Zhuangzi, and you have to be like a mirror. Rumi also says, you have to be
Mm,
like a mirror, and you reflect what you see without any judgment. And then later on, you can try to figure out, okay, what I felt, what does it mean? So you have to separate your sensation from the interpretation.
mm.
And then I think what you mean, that more innate knowledge that you at some point, that's possible, that you uh that's I think still another stage.
Well, I feel
um
like I've heard I don't do that way, and I didn't, but I hear some practitioners now complaining about other practitioners, acupuncturists in the US, that, oh, they just decide that they have an intuition that it's liver Yang syndrome or something, but they didn't even finish the exam, and and I, I have problem believing that with in any field, even with a psychic or or whatever it is, a wise man, like until they've sat down and taken in that information to just have something pop in your head because you feel like it could be, I'm not saying it's not real for some, but it seems more like an ego play for
yeah,
people who maybe aren't spiritually or contemplative in their practice for many hours in a day, or having been that way. I feel that it's more of an ego play that they're listening to in their mind, not really a deep intuition.
yeah, I completely agree. And I see, I come sometimes also across that, I do also internships, and sometimes you
Yeah,
have people who even have not no proper education yet, and they still think, oh, I think it is this because I feel it. And that's
because I
very
want it to
tricky.
be.
Yeah, so you have to be very keen that you're not projecting stuff. So
Right.
really, you have to feel, and that there are all these ways to evaluate what you feel is true. And I like something Dan always says, Dan Bensky, prove yourself to be wrong. So if you figure out, if you think, well, I think there is this and this going on. Let's say there is a spleen liver disharmony, but check it out, and we have the tools to check it out. And very often I'm wrong. Very often I think, oh, I think I know what it is. But then you are a couple of steps further, and you think, oh no, I was completely wrong.
Well, that's the
This is
scientific
going
method.
on.
Yeah, that's the scientific method playing into the traditional technique, which is create a hypothesis and try to disprove it, right?
Yeah,
So your hypothesis is, I really think it's this, and then try to disprove it. Like you're saying, Bensky said, that's great. That's a great method of work.
that's very
Yeah.
useful. Yeah,
Yeah.
yes.
When you talk about the shape of chi, can you tell the shape of chi? You gave a couple of kind of visual examples, scattering or but when we do pulse diagnosis, or for people who are listening who don't know, there's like a wiry pulse and a floating pulse and a sinking pulse. There's fast pulse and weak pulse. There's all these things that you have to learn in school and diagnosis, and you only get good at it by feeling pulses, right? But are you is what you're referring to as the shape of chi different from the shape of the pulse, even though the chi is, animating the blood to make the pulse move a certain way?
I think there are a lot of comparisons. And maybe it's nice to tell the story how this was developed, because this was something Chip developed. And Chip was also studying with the Japanese teachers. He was in Tokyo actually one time, and they had this session. So in the Toyo Hari tradition, they figured out that because they work in groups, they have this Kosato method. So it's one person is lying on the table and then other students are around, somebody's doing needling and then the other feel the pulse and they will tell the change because actually in these techniques, as soon as you needle, you will feel a change in the chi.
Mm.
And the pulse, of course, is a very good measurement, will tell you. But there are only two people who can feel the pulse at the wrist at least. Maybe somebody can feel the temples or at the ankles. That's already less secure in the sense of being completely clear, but so the pulse is a good indicator. And
Hmm.
then what they figured out was, and probably that's also maybe a way to get more focus, is that so you feel the pulse, and then another student feels your pulse, and you have a whole chain. So they feel each other's pulse. And Chip was there in Tokyo during that meeting, and he said, "Well, I don't want to feel the seventh person's pulse, because it might be distorted, Maybe the guy before you or the lady before you has a cup of espressos, and then I'm not sure if the pulse is still there's the idea of the resonance. So
Right.
and to a certain degree it works, because I worked in these settings, so it is it is a way. So, but he put his hand on the body, and he could explain all kind of things he felt in the chi, the others could feel in the pulse. So in
Mm.
that sense, I think as a general marker, it's a little bit the same. Of course, in the pulse, you would have also the different positions which are related. So maybe for the people who don't know the pulse diagnosis, but you have the general pulses, which give a more general idea about the chi dynamic and also might give you an indication about phlegm or blood stasis or whatever. And then there are the different positions which are related to actually where we talked already about the Zhang and the Fu. So
Yeah.
you have the superficial and the deeper positions, and they will tell you something about the kidney or liver or whatever. And that of course you don't feel in the shape of the chi because it's more general. It gives you a general idea what the chi dynamic is doing. But instead of whether it's calm or agitated, if it's floating or sinking, whether it's very tight, blocked, or whether it's open, all these qualities you can feel. And sometimes, to my experience, is that the shape of the chi is sometimes more informative than the
Hmm.
pulse.
Hmm.
And also, a lot of people have difficulty with feeling the pulse. Still, even
Right.
some accomplished practitioners have some. The pulse is not so easy to master.
Right.
Let's be fair. I did for a long time.
It is.
But
Yeah.
anyhow, so the shape of the chi is a very nice way, and we have more in engaging vitality. We teach a whole bunch of palpation techniques, which are very very nice as a complementary to the things you already do, like observing the tongue and feeling the pulse, or looking at the hara, looking at the sun in the eyes, or whatever. Yeah. So it's very useful. And maybe
When
to add to that, maybe Mark, sorry to interrupt you, Mark, but so I think the great thing of palpation, if you would ask me why is palpation so important and why should we bring back palpation, and that's also maybe that I start to realize that already when I was visiting Japan or showing these Japanese teachers, I realized okay, it's a lot of useful information because palpation gives you, first of all, it gives you a general idea. So diagnostically, it's very useful. But at the same time, it gives you, during the treatment, a continuous feedback. So whatever you do, whatever needle technique you do, or moxa, or even when you do tuina, or you do cupping, or whatever intervention you do, every moment it will affect the chi. And if you're able to measure what you're doing, whether you're on the right track or not, again, going back to proving you're right or wrong, because sometimes you think, oh, this is the good channel, oh, this is the good point, and you do the needle and you think, well, not much change. And you really can want, oh, yeah, this must be the point, but no, I have to find another point, another channel. And so it is a very great feedback mechanism. And at the same time, also after the treatment, it's not a black box, you really know that something really has changed during the treatment. And also it can help you to avoid overtreatment because you can also do too much during a treatment. So it has many valuable aspects.
is is there's another thing that we spoke about before offline about signal evaluation. Is that different from shape of chi and the pulse, the signal evaluation?
Yeah, yes. So this is something which was actually originally developed by Jean-Paul Barral. It's a very famous French osteopath who's still alive. He's still teaching, and he's a very interesting guy. And he developed what we call manual thermal evaluation or manual thermal diagnose. And so they use in osteopathy, they use it mainly to find areas of restriction. And we figured out that actually it's very useful also in the East Asian medicine context. So we use it for different purposes. It gives us a general idea. If some area is low, it might mean that there's a restriction. So for example, you can check the jowls, for example, the upper jowl, the middle jowl, the lower jowl. And if one of the jowls has a lower signal, it we very often are intended to think directly about deficiency. And if everything is low, actually the whole chi, especially the yang chi, the wei chi might be low.
Mm.
But sometimes if one area is just low, it means there is a restriction in that area. So we use it for that kind of goal. But another purpose is to scan the channels. And this is something really then developed, Dan Bensky. So you can, if you find the thermal, there is a thermal layer above the body, around 15 centimeters. If the body is healthy, it's around 15 centimeters above the body. And so you can feel that layer, and that can sometimes it can be warm or cold or change in pressure. Actually, I feel it more generally as a change in pressure, but that's very
Mhm.
personal also. Though. And we have our ways to teach people how to feel that. And actually, we find that this is actually a technique people easily pick up. When we
Hmm.
teach this to students, people pick it quite easily up. And you can scan also the channels. So you follow the contours of the body, you follow the channel. And if there are points which are active, they will radiate, they will give a chi signal. And if you look to the nature of points, so we call them points, but in Chinese, as you know, we call them she. So they're, and one translation is there are cavities, isn't it? So they're
Yes.
in a way caves, and if the chi is active, it will radiate, it will give a signal, and then you know, oh, this point might be useful to treat.
Hmm. Like open windows, the air
Like open
comes in
windows, yeah, yeah,
and
yeah. That's
around,
a
but
good,
turned
yeah,
turned the other direction.
yeah. I like that
Um,
word.
yeah, yeah. Is you had mentioned, or I heard you state in another interview that the therapist state of mind is crucial in treatment. To
Yes.
tell us about that and the focus there.
I think already, I think that's also one of the reasons why it's very good to revisit the classical literature,
Yes.
because especially the Ling Shu chapter one, and actually for the folks who really like to read it, I think it's available online. It's somewhere. I think if people visit the Engaging Vitality website, even they can find it, because Dan and Chip they translated that chapter, and it's also translated by Unschuld, of course, and there are more translations. And if you can read it in Chinese, it's even better. But but anyhow, it's very beautiful because in Ling Shu Wan, it's very clearly explained. Actually, I would say the essence of acupuncture is very clearly explained in Ling Shu Wan. And it's very much emphasized that the state of the practitioner is fundamental. So you have to be in a state of receptivity, awareness, attention, focused attention, and it's not just putting a needle into a point. It's a very subtle process which you really engage with the chi. You communicate with the chi, and that's only possible if you are in a certain state of receptivity, stillness, openness. And it's interesting because, and I've been wondering a lot about that because if you go back, if you read also this material like this, the Ling Shu chapter one, and there are more chapters in the Ling, especially in the Ling Shu, they reflect very much these very early internal cultivation literature, like the Neye or the 12 Yed Nob inscription, and and also scholars agree more or less that we suppose that these ideas came from the same circle of people,
Hmm.
people who did the Naiguan, they went inside. Probably that's also how they figured out that there were channels, because somehow, how did I find out, you know?
I know it seems definitely mystical, right?
Yeah. And of course, the Chinese were good observers, so there are a lot of metaphors to the nature and irrigation, and these ideas also might have been taken. And we found, for example, the early channels. They found, for example, how do you say the weft, the warp in the weft. How do you say that in English? When you weave something and you have the frame. They found
Um,
that also in the tombs, actually, where they
oh,
excavated the earliest. And that's also interesting because, in a way, the channels, the Jing and the Lao, are also in a way warp and weft, isn't it? So
right.
these ideas might have been there too, but for sure also these people must have meditated, and they're very adamant about that. When you do acupuncture, you have to be in a way in a meditative state.
Yeah. I think so, especially in the diagnosis part at at first, because if you're agitated, if your chi is out of, out of balance, uh, how are you going to feel and perceive, right? How is your touch going to be correct? Because you're affecting, it could be affecting the way you feel, and the way you perceive what's happening,
Very true.
for sure. Um,
I think in all aspects, actually. So in the diagnosis, it's very important because if you, we talked already about it, you know, if you're biased or you have your projections, you think, oh, I think you have this or that. I think you have liver cheese stagnation. Oh, yeah. If you really think hard, you will feel it for sure. But that's your projection. So we
right.
have to be receptive. So we have to be open and empty and still. So that's very important. So, and that's with all the things we feel when you feel the pulse or all the other things you do. So that state is very important. But then also, as soon as you start to treat, when you engage with the chi, when you needle, that's also that same attention is very much required. And where is the chi? So a lot of people they think, oh, I have to needle this point at this depth because it's written in this book. But the chi that can vary. Of course, you have to take always in account the anatomical structure. So you know some points you can't needle very deep, or other points you can. But you have to meet the chi. Where is the chi? How do I contact the chi? When does the chi arrive? And that's also the whole Daichi story. A lot of people think some aspect the patient might feel, you know, like that electric feeling or something like that. But there's another aspect of Daichi and also Chi Chi, or the arrival of Chi, which something really the practitioner should experience in themselves.
Hmm.
So when to withdraw the needle, you know, when
Right.
where to enter, where to meet the Chi, when to take away the needle. These are all very subtle things. So that also requires you to be in that state.
Yeah, and I think these are skills that, I mean, they really take decades of practice, and dedication. And I don't
Yes,
think most practitioners, in the West, I'll say, are like that. They're very clinical because we're raised in this clinical environment,
that's
and
true.
many work inside medical offices. So they don't have the luxury of time. I want to kind of bridge into medicine and internal cultivation and,
Yeah.
and the connection there, because I don't think many of our listeners realize that in these traditional healing systems, and we're talking about East Asia medicine at the moment, that internal cultivation practices are part of the clinical procedure. So NADON, or internal practices. Now you've been immersed in those for quite a while, and people think of qigong and different methods, yi jin jing and eight brocade. I mean, there's a bunch of popular ones out there. Um, what do you see as the strongest connection and most maybe misunderstood connection that's necessary between NADON practice and clinical medicine?
Okay, that's a very good question. I think, first of all, I think there are many different internal arts which all have their benefit. For example, we are doing now that actually Robbie set that up. That's a very interesting study group we have with Dolly Young, and
Right.
we study a Daoyin text from the 7th century.
Mm-hmm.
And it's very interesting for all the different patterns. They really prescribe Daoyin exercises. And so, and of course, Qigong is the way we know it now is a new thing, but of course
Yeah.
it has its predecessors, partly Daoyin and other internal practices. So they all, of course, they're all overlaps with Chinese medicine in one way or another. And people figured out that breath and movement had effect on the body. So I think along with acupuncture and herbal medicine, they always prescribed also exercises next to
Hmm.
dietary. The other thing you mentioned, Neidan, is very interesting, and that got my attention a lot. I'm very interested in internal alchemy since
Yeah.
my early youth. That's also due to my father because
Oh,
we had, for example, The Secret of the Golden Flower in the library, which was a corrupted translation by Wilhelm.
hopefully it was the good one. Yeah.
Well, it was not a good, well, it was the one from Wilhelm, and the
Right.
commentary was doing completely distorted, but it triggered that
It
interest.
triggered it. Yeah.
And it took me a long time to find good information about Neidan because there is a lot of bullshit about it.
Yeah.
Even nowadays, it's not so easy for people to get access to proper Neidan teachers because the people who really know often don't want to share because especially the Chinese, they're not always so open to share it. And some do actually, happily enough. And then there are all these so-called New Age gurus but what they teach generally is more kind of qigong and not
Right.
the Naidan.
Right.
But for me, so I was a long time interested in Naidan, and then that took another turn. Actually, when I started to study with Chip, who was really interested in Naidan very deeply, and he translated this Jijing Baimakaw from Li Zhen. And Li
Hmm.
Zhen is one of the most important physicians in the history of Chinese medicine, and he's very well known also for the pulse. Everybody who learns the pulse now, that's of course it's much older, but Li Zhen made that very nice Master Binhu Lake, what was it, Pulse Master
Hmm.
uh, study, something like that. That was the title. So that these are the 27 pulses. But Li Zhen is also well known for the Benqiao Gangmu, this big encyclopedia of herbal medicine. It's the biggest Chinese pharmacopoeia there is. But in that Benqiao Gangmu is another book which is an explanation of the extraordinary vessels. And Chip translated that. And that's an amazing book because this Zen was probably one of the first who really made that bridge between internal alchemy and medicine. And especially in his case, in relation to the extraordinary vessels. So he said, and I think these ideas were relatively late in Chinese medicine because I think Naidan only properly started to be developed after the Song dynasty,
Hmm.
and it really took off probably in the Ming. So at the time of Li Zhen, it was Naidan was well established, and actually it was very every all the literati were studying Naidan at that time. Also, all these great physicians like Zhang Jibin and so at that time you see a lot of ideas from Naidan entering Chinese medicine. So Li Zhen is a very good example for the extraordinary vessels. So what he's saying, he said, well, we have an idea, a medical idea about the extraordinary vessels, but these Naidan people have very different ideas about the extraordinary vessels. And for us as physicians, it would be very worthwhile to study also the Naidan approach.
Hmm.
And I think a lot of people are not aware, but many of the ideas we have nowadays about the extraordinary vessels are partly actually coming from that tradition.
Hmm.
So that's one example. Another good example is, for example, the whole Mingmen idea about Mingmen and ministerial fire. Also, these ideas have been profoundly influenced by ideas from the Naidan tradition and again also from the Neo-Confucian tradition, because all these traditions also influence each other. Naidan itself is very eclectic, as you know. It's it's partly Daoist, but then there's a lot of Buddhist stuff inside
Yeah.
and Neo-Confucian stuff inside. It's really pretty mixed.
It's
So I
interesting.
think I think Naidan has definitely a profound influence on medicine, much more than people are aware.
Hmm.
Yeah.
What was your practice? What is your practice like? Because you've really delved into this in the last
Yes.
decade or so.
Yes. I'm mainly attracted to what we call in the Naidan tradition the middle school, and I think Naidan is interesting also because from for from an outsider, it looks very complicated. And if you
Hmm.
look at all these Naidan texts, they're very esoteric and they talk about dragons and tigers and Mercury and lead and all that. It's very complicated. But its actual practice is not so complicated.
It's
And
just hard to talk about it,
it's
right?
hard to talk about. And a lot of stuff happens by itself. So, and that's also, I think, if people ask me, for example, to make a differentiation between Qigong and Naidan, for example, Qigong is much more, I would say, much more post-heaven and much more intention generated. So and it's completely fine. So Qigong is very useful. I do it every day, but it's much more with intention. And Naidan is really, I would say, and there are different schools in the Naidan. So there are many different. So some schools have more what we call post-heaven methods. So there you use maybe some more imagination. But ultimately, I think what is very important in Naidan practice is you enter a very deep state of stillness and silence and emptiness, and you come in a way in the most yin state. And that's of course very Taoist, you have to get in the darkness, and you go, often you go to for example, the lower dantian is a very dark, deep area in your body. And you sink into there and you're in that state of absolute stillness. And then somehow that ignites the primal yang.
Mm.
And then things starts to happen. So my main practice is pretty simple. So I sit and of course I did other stuff, but mainly I let the chi do the job.
Yeah, yeah. If you do the practice right, you set the environment within your
Right.
body, then what should evolve or what should come up comes up, and what should move moves.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and then it's a point, and that's important, I think. And I'm very grateful to Robert because that's also our link because we met each
Yeah.
other through Robert. And I think
Robert
Robert is
Kuhn's. Yeah.
Robert Koons because he's really good in explaining these things to modern day people in a sound language. But I think ultimately, of course, you need somebody to point out to you where you are and what you have to do at some stages. So, oh, and it's a fine line between Wu Wei and Yao Wei, or Wu Wei or Yao Wei. So you have to know most of it is non-action or effortless action, I would say. But at some point you have to do something. And maybe it's something very small, but you have to recognize, okay, I'm in this state, or I need to lead the chi to there or there. And most of it is just happening by itself.
Yeah.
And again, there are different schools and there are many different approaches, and I studied many of them by now. With Robert, we studied now altogether 6 years, I think, and we read all this. We read a lot of text, but I feel very attracted to the what we call the middle school. And one of my favorite teachers in the middle school is Huang Yuanji. So that's a figure from the, yeah, probably we don't know exactly when he lived, but probably late Ming. And he works on Li Dao Chun, his ideas, and it's very sophisticated. But it's not the most. If I would teach, I just kicked off a Nijdan course here in Holland, and I wouldn't teach beginners directly Huan Yuanji because that's
Mm.
it's very profound, but maybe also to get in that state directly is not so easy. So maybe you need some in the beginning some tricks.
Yeah. Well, all of these things that we're talking about need to be cultivated. It's not just you learn a technique and you do it like cooking. Cooking
No,
needs practice, but these exercises, so to speak, need cultivation. Need,
cultivate.
time and focus and intention and,
But then
and
again, you said cooking, but even cooking, a
yeah.
real good cook,
Well, a
and
chef. Yeah.
yeah, the chef. And I like in that sense also. I think the Zhuangzi is very. He gives a lot of beautiful examples. So we have Gu Ding, for example. That's a good
That's
example.
right.
And actually, in many of these stories in the Zhuangzi, it is that you really get so far that you learn a skill, and then you really have to merge with that skill to be able to really master it. And that, of course, that's cultivation. So I think whatever
Right.
you do, whether it's acupuncture or martial art or even cooking,
Yeah, 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 yeah. Is there a secular Neidan practice different from the esoteric ones that and what do you find as the difference, like a core difference between the two?
that's a good question. Well, it's always difficult to say because Naidan, of course, came from a very eclectic background. And although I think it's really, in a way, rooted in Taoism, it's clearly influenced by many different things. So, as I said, I mentioned there's a lot of Buddhist stuff inside and Neo-Confucian. And what you see also is that many strata from Chinese society used to practice it. So the literati used to practice it. So it was not really only limited to religious Taoists. And I think, of course, you always have to realize where things come from. So there's always this color from Taoist religion and then Buddhist ideas. Um, but I think Naidan on itself is not a real religious practice. It's much more a technique. Of
Yeah,
course, the goals, and that's again, depending also which point in time, I think the early Naidan practitioners really had that goal of immortality. And that's a real Taoist idea, maybe, to become an immortal. Then at some point, you see, at least from some texts, you see a shift, I think, under Buddhist influence, that maybe the goal was more to become enlightened or a Buddha. But also this interchange. So in many of these texts, at one page they talk about becoming an immortal, and then they say, oh, becoming Buddha Vairocana or something like that. So um, I prefer myself to see it more as a technique, though I think you never can disconnect it from the wider background. So you have to understand something about Daoism and Buddhism and Confucianism if you want to understand Naidan, for sure. But we see, and that's what I like. Robert, of course, is much colored because his teacher, Yang Hai, as you know him too, he comes from the background from Chen Yining, which was a reformer in the early 20th century in Shanghai. And he had a more secular approach to Neidan for sure.
yeah,
And I think I might be a little bit more colored by that approach because I always call myself a skeptical mystic. So I am at some point I won't call myself religious, but I'm still open to the wonders of the universe. And
yeah.
I've seen too much stuff in my life to ignore that. But I'm very careful with the religious dogma, and I think, and it's interesting because the people there are some very serious people also, religious Taoist serious people, and I don't want to disregard them because I know some of them and they're very serious and they do a good job in their field. But when I talk to them about Neidan, I have the idea that for them Neidan is at the most it's a small aspect, and
Mm,
even they don't do so much Neidan. They are much more into ritual and moral behavior, which are
right.
also very important points. So I don't want to disregard it. So I you don't need to be a religious Taoist to practice Neidan. Let's put it that way.
There we go.
You
You
don't
know,
need to don the robes.
yeah, you've studied, I mean, so many different methods of internal cultivation and healing, from the West, the osteopathic medicine and Chinese acupuncture, Japanese acupuncture. You mentioned, I think, Turkish or Middle Eastern medicine. I'm probably misrepresenting. You can correct it in a moment. Um, and I'm wondering when there's that much influence, how does one keep, and I'm with you on that. My training and background is
Yeah.
wide and
Yeah.
vast. Folk healing and faith healing in the Philippines and Malaysia. I've studied in different places. So we're both on that path. Same with
Yeah.
martial arts, lots of different things. But I know you have to go deep in one or two to have a really strong pillars, foundations and pillars to hold up the pillars. And if it's two, they should be different enough but complementary. But when we start going three, four, five, which I'm, I'm guilty of, you're guilty of, because it enhances practice, it enhances our self-knowledge, our understanding, our learning. There's so many more tools in the tool chest, right? So the question becomes, how do we keep ourselves from saying, um, you know what, I'm just going to create a new form of medicine because I have this broad understanding like nobody, or losing the core principles of certain things that made them work because we have too much in our head that, like you're saying, revisit the Ling Shu, or the Neijing, and forgetting and then misapplying certain things because there's too much content in our head.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a very good question. That's something also I struggle with because I think we share that eclectic
Yeah,
worldview. That we have so many interests, and that's also maybe the problem. If you would grown up, let's say that two centuries ago, you would be born in a village in China, or let's say you were in Suzhou or something like that. You would have maybe a master you would study with, maybe a couple of masters, but you would have a certain limited environment. You wouldn't be, although again, and that's also interesting, some of these great doctors, they were exposed. A lot of people are not aware, but a lot of
mm,
ideas in what we call Chinese medicine, some ideas come from India,
yeah.
some ideas come from the Arab world,
Well, that
Persia,
Silk Road, there was so
the
much,
Silk Road.
even in the religions between Buddhism,
For
Islam,
sure,
and
for sure.
Christianity. Yeah,
So there's always this cross, and I think for me personally, it enriched me, and now at this stage in life, also I'm able to make these connections, so I benefit from that. But also at the same time, I would warn people because there is also the danger that you can lose yourself. And at some point also you have to limit yourself. So you mentioned already, I have interest in Unani, so the Greek Arabic tradition, Persian also, because it's some of the great physicians of the Unani tradition were Persians, like Ibn Sina or Al-Razi. But then also Tibetan medicine got my attention early on because I studied with these Tibetan teachers. And in extension, Ayurveda, because of course Tibetan medicine is very interesting because that's really a mixture of everything. They
right.
took stuff from China, from India, from Persia, whatever. So, but then I realized, okay, I I can't do all that. So I have some knowledge about Tibetan medicine. Sometimes I might use some of these ideas in my clinic, especially in relation to herbs, maybe. And the same I would say for Unani. I use sometimes some things, but mainly I would consider myself a practitioner in. I prefer to call it East Asian medicine because that's more inclusive.
Yeah,
And then again, even then it's hard, because Chinese medicine is huge. And I'm now 40 years into the journey, and every time I think, oh, I know only very, very little bit.
I hear
And
you.
and there's also this issue like with acupuncture and herbal medicine. So I could say I am both because I am an acupuncturist and I'm a herbalist. Still, I would say, and this is something Stephen told me, and I think Stephen Burch, and I think to some point he was right. He said you can either become a very good acupuncturist or a very good herbalist. And I know very few people who are both at the same time.
Yeah,
And maybe when I met Dan Bensky and Charles Chase, those were exceptions. But even Chip, at his last conversation I had with him before he passed away, he said, "Well, Felix, ultimately, in the first place, I'm an acupuncturist, although he had a much more sound understanding of Chinese herbal medicine than I have. And so I would say, in the first place, I'm an acupuncturist with a great interest in Chinese herbal medicine, and I use it. I use it daily. But you have to limit yourself somewhere because you can't do everything. And also in terms of styles, you can't. There are things which, for example, Wang Yuyi, I like his approach also, but I decided not to study that because I know a little bit about his ideas, but I have other ways, and I by now also I know that the tools I have, they are pretty. There's still things I want to learn, so it's not that
Right.
put a barrier, but yeah, you have to limit yourself somewhere.
Yeah. A lot of times the approach is different, but the outcome, you get the same outcome. So you don't have
Sure.
to learn how to fry chicken 20 ways.
No.
If just learn one or two ways to fry the chicken and then you go study how to roast it separately, But you know, you don't need all the different diagnostic tools that overlap. They're just different ways to get to the same core answer.
Yeah, I think
Some
if you
point.
have at a certain degree, if you have enough tools, you can do a lot. And I
Yeah.
agree. There are many ways which lead to the same result.
Yeah.
I think as long as you're open and you really pay attention to your patient and to the process,
Yeah.
uh, you can do many things. So yeah, I think you need some limitation. But on the other side, like for example, when it comes to philosophy, um, I I really like to be eclectic because I think at some point, Eastern philosophy is great. I'm admirer of East, but to some ideas also like the whole Enlightenment process we had in the West, which had also its benefits, and to have a critical mind and critical thinking is also very good to have. So I
Yes.
think I think to combine those things
Right.
are not bad at all.
Yeah, I agree. That's the yin and yang, right?
Yes,
The two separates become a whole. Um, Qi, um, qi or energy in the body is running through the jinglo, which I think was it the French that coined the term meridian. And
I
we
think
call
so.
it,
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
so we all in the West call them meridians. Meridians are channels, right? But they're called the Jinglo. And other Western practitioners or scientists are trying to say, well, there's no such thing as qi. What you're really doing when you put the needle in is affecting the nervous system and nothing else. And what are your thoughts on that topic? Um, Qi and
Well,
Jinglo versus needle just affecting a nerve signal.
okay. Well, I think by now I have enough practice in acupuncture to know that it's not just because then it wouldn't matter where you would stick the needle or whatever, and it,
Right.
it matters a lot, and how deep and where you go. So I think we it's always good to try to figure out with our modern knowledge what acupuncture might mean, what it might do. And so I'm completely open for research. Um, but I think acupuncture is so diverse that you never can catch it just by one thing. To give you an example, I think definitely there is a neurological component. So I think there is some stimulation of the nervous system with acupuncture, and studies show that. But there is another interesting thing also. I learned it very early on already because that research was done quite early, I think in the 80s already. They did, for example, they did local anesthesia with acupuncture on rabbits, and they connected the blood flow. So somehow they connect rabbit A to B, and then they anesthetized, let's say, the left foot of rabbit A, and the left foot of rabbit B was also anesthetized. So that means actually there is a humoral input as well,
Hmm.
which is not a neurological thing. So, and probably it's both. But again, I'm not a I'm not a scientist. I'm not a neurologist, um, and I think there is a lot of work to be done here still.
Right.
Um, so, and I think also where we have to be very careful is to make one-on-one translation from. Also, we see that in disease mechanisms. We try to for example, we have a Chinese pattern which we try to attach to a Western disease mechanism, and that's also very tricky, I think. So
Yeah.
as long as you just use it as tools to get somewhere, it's maybe okay. So for example, we do it actually. We try to analyze sometimes. I study also with Volker Scheidt. It's also a very good teacher in herbal medicine. and we have classes. We every year we go to Italy, and in this group we have actually a lot of doctors, and we try to translate sometimes things, from Western medicine into Chinese medicine or the other way around. But we are always aware that you never can translate something one on one. But
Yeah.
it's interesting to understand, oh, these processes might mean this or that in biomedicine or vice versa.
Hmm. Yeah, very interesting. So I'd like to know, as a fellow traveler on the path here, you've got 40 years steeped deeply in these traditions and studying and learning. What has come up recently for you? What took you 40 years to see during your decades in the field as a patient, as a student, as a learner, as a practitioner, that you're only starting to understand relatively recently?
Well, there are many things.
Oh, great.
But to give you an example, like some theories in Chinese medicine, which are very hard to understand. And you need also people to be able to point that out. And I think we also, so for example, my Chinese is almost zero, so I can read a little bit, but it's almost nothing. So I was always dependent on translations. And now we start to get better translations, but to have access to, and this is something I really would recommend people who study now Chinese medicine learn Chinese and learn also the classical Chinese, because you have access to
Yeah.
incredible amount of literature. But to give an example, for example, a theme which only I recently start to understand properly is, for example, the whole Mingmen idea and how and how to differentiate ministerial fire from sovereign fire. And I just mentioned Volker Scheidt because I study with him now for quite some years, and he did a very good job for me in for example, clarifying that. And that took me ages. If you would have asked me 10 years ago, I might have said that I knew it, but I was off the mark.
Yeah.
And still, I'm not getting it 100% because it's very complicated material, and I'm for sure that most of the practitioners struggle with it,
Yeah.
or they
It's
think they know it, but then they,
well, we all think we know until we don't. And
yeah, correct.
the thing is that part of all this, people like us, people who are on a long journey, especially Western medical practitioners, they lack humility, many of them.
Yes.
They have the answers and that's it. But we have to be able to, I think any good practitioner has to be able to admit when they're wrong, especially to themselves, because it's like another fun eureka moment of, wow, I got to another layer of my understanding. And it should have nothing to do with the ego in a bad way. Because nobody's right a lot even.
Yeah.
We're just trying our best, and it's so great when we have these eye-opening moments. It shows that there's still more to learn. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's the beauty. I think I would say my whole journey in East Asian medicine, and that's in all the other fields we discussed as well. It is an endless ocean, huh? In Farsi they would say Derya bi payam, so an ocean without end. And it's true because in the beginning you really think, oh, I have some idea, and then you think, oh my God, but
Right.
and you have many of these experience in on your path. And I think it's only good because it's good to be humble and it's good to understand that we even if we are really very very good, then still it's just a tiny bit you can understand because
Yeah.
we are human beings. But it gives also a lot of inspiration because I know also colleagues who started out more or less at the same time as I, and they more or less do the same stuff as I did 40 years ago, and they learned some other things too, um, but I really always want to be challenged. Oh yeah, there's something else to learn. Oh, this is something I didn't get. And and that really that makes it not boring. I would, if I would just know everything and would do all the same stuff, I would be completely bored. I would probably shift it to another job or something like that.
I spend a lot of my time when I'm not working for money, doing what we do, that I spend it reading and researching
Yeah,
and
yeah,
writing and
that's
meeting
great.
teachers and exchanging ideas. Like now, we're talking
Yeah.
to exchange ideas with other teachers and practitioners because it's just fascinating. It's a great thing when you love what you do. You
I'm literally every day thankful
I see on
that
your Facebook you're sharing these great photos of books that you found or places that you've gone. I'm just like, I want that book. I want to go to that place now.
yeah, that's cool, huh?
It's very
Yeah, and
cool.
that's so nice, and that's also that I really like to talk to you also because we have so many things in common. We discovered that we both were also that we didn't talk about that, but we have our interest in Sufism and all that kind of
Absolutely.
stuff. And so yeah, I completely agree. And like many people we see in our clinics also many people are really unhappy in life, either because their job, or something else. But very often they have a job which maybe they initially liked, but because of the stress, the tension, or maybe the content, they're not happy, and that makes them sick. And we do
Yes,
something we really like,
right.
and that
Well,
that's
depression, anxiety, it's
so much, so much.
loneliness is a big epidemic now
Oh
around
yeah,
the
for
world.
sure.
And you think with all of the connection that we have through social media, but it's not real.
I
You're
agree
not
completely.
actually talking to somebody. You're just scrolling through their ideas,
I agree.
and so forth. And at least when you have Neidan practices, meditation practices, qigong practices, you have something to do and you're wanting to learn more. And then with that thirst for knowledge, you want to go out and meet and exchange, and I think that's a great thing on this path. I wanted to ask you, I know I'm hijacking your whole evening over there.
No, no, no problem at all.
But
With pleasure, Mark.
I want to ask you, given your decades of clinical experience and training, what advice can you give to younger practitioners, not only younger in age, but younger in the practice of
Mhm.
traditional medicine, who want to move beyond the protocols, the established protocols of the clinical environment? What should they prioritize in their first 5 or 10 years so that they can get beyond reliance on those base protocols?
I think that's also something we discuss now in schools here. I think it would be really good if people at earlier stages are already introduced to, for example, like we do with palpation.
Yeah,
Because if I would have learned that stuff in my early years, I would even be way more further than I am now.
yeah,
And there are some schools like SIME, the Shadow Institute for East Asian Medicine, of Oriental Medicine. They have a very good thing that you get a very broad curriculum, and then you're exposed. So they at some days they expose you to engaging vitality, and other days to Japanese acupuncture, and other days to Wang Yuyi's approach. So you really learn these different approaches
yeah,
which already give you an idea. Oh, wait a minute, there is more. And they in Germany now, some of the schools they start also to introduce some of that material also now more in their basic programs. We're about to talk also about the schools we teach here to do something similar. I do already something like I do every year I teach at Qingbai Academy, which is one of the bigger schools, older schools in Holland,
hmm
and I do their internal internship. So I show students, these are still studying acupuncture, so they're second year, first, second year acupuncture course.
right,
And and I realize that it's maybe too early, but already to show them there is another path. And I think so, if you have the opportunity at early stage to be exposed to that material and study that material, that's very beneficial.
Hmm.
And I think also we have to rethink. We have a big issue. I think all and I'm not completely sure how it is organized in the States, although I have a vague idea, and I know in most European countries we still use textbooks in TCM education, like Majocha. And no
Right.
bad words about Majocha, he did his job at that point in time. That was very useful. But we are 50 years further
Right.
and we still use these books.
Yeah.
And I think we really have to move. So I think really, and that's one of my worries also. If we don't move beyond it and we train our students better, Chinese medicine might become very mechanical. We see it also today in China, actually. That's the sad truth. Of course, you can still find very good practitioners in China, but a lot of what is done in the hospitals, and that's also very protocolized and it's very symptomatic. And then I hear that story very often. People come to me, they have seen already several acupuncturists and said, well, I tried acupuncture, but it didn't help. And it's not that I'm such a good acupuncturist. It's just that uh, a lot of people don't practice the way actually it was intended to be. And so I would encourage students to find good teachers if they're able to, and also and to read the literature. So go back to like the Ling Shu. It's very good to have a basic understanding of the early intentions of East Asian medicine, and then of course it's and to understand it's a long road.
Yeah. It sure is.
But
For
I
our
think that
close,
these things can help. Yeah.
yeah. I'd like to close on what is your greatest hope for the future of traditional medicine, not confined to East Asian, that you would hope to look forward to for it.
Okay, that's a great question. Well, my hope, of course, is that we don't lose our tradition, and at the same time remain innovative and open. Because uh, I talk now about East Asian medicine, but I think the same rules for all the traditions. You have seen that they all always have changed and developed. And actually, COVID was a good example. When COVID came, um, nobody knew what to do.
Right.
The Western doctors didn't know, and the Chinese doctor didn't know. And all the people who said, "Oh, this is Shanghan, and we have to use these and these formulas," or people said it's Wenbing, and you have to do this. It turned out to be something else. And then, of course, sometimes sometimes some Shanghan formulas work very well with some COVID cases or Wenbing. So it doesn't mean, but it was a challenge for us. We have to change. And it's interesting in the history of Chinese medicine, a lot of times when there were these big pandemics, actually the whole Wenbing school developed because of these pandemics.
Mm.
At that time, 17th century China. And I think for many in the history of medicine, you can see that in other medical traditions as well. When there are these big challenges, they have to reinvent, they have to develop new strategies. So at one point, you need to be rooted in the tradition. You shouldn't lose your tradition, but at the same time, be flexible. And like, for example, in Chinese medicine, one of my worries, for example, now is that some of the herbs are not available anymore, either by regulation of the government, or they become very rare or very expensive. There are many reasons. So then we have to be flexible. So sometimes we can find substitutes in the Chinese medical tradition. We have a lot, we have 5,000 species in the pharmacopoeia. But sometimes, maybe if they're not available, you can think in the Western medical tradition, in the herbal medical tradition, or as we just talked about, the Middle Eastern medical tradition. Maybe you can find local herbs and you can understand the dynamic of that herb, and you could replace that.
Hmm.
That's just one example. So I think, and then you still have the framework, You still have the ideas of Chinese medicine. You don't change that, but maybe you change the ingredients.
Yeah. So using the principles of what is the action of the herb
Correct.
and swapping it out. So the tradition is also a tradition of change and progress. You
Always,
know, always.
always.
Well, I like to thank you, Felix De Haas, for this really deep and enriching conversation. You shared your technical depth and the live path on your own journey. It's been exciting and fun for me. I really appreciate your time.
Well, thank you very much, Mark. And I hope we should have one time another interview. And because I think there are a lot of stuff. Also, I'm very curious about a lot of stuff you do, and that would be nice to talk about because I think we share a lot of interest for
For
sure.
sure.